applied in terms of digital applied to the automotive, and Harry West, who today teaches at Columbia University, but who for a long period was head of the Frog Group. And we're here to talk about the world of design. But we have the great privilege of also having with us Vice Minister Alessandra Todde. She is linked up. I thank her first of all for having paid such great attention to the world of design. Also because what we're experiencing today, it's been hard for her to find time for our meeting, but she is connected from the ministry in Rome. Now, before starting, I'd like to spend a couple of words about ANFIA. ANFIA is the Italian National Association, Automotive Association. The automotive business counts for about 5,000 companies with a turnover around 5 billion euros, and that's about 5% of Italian GDP. So I'm sure you realize what the importance of this sector is for us and for our economy. ANFIA, our association, has more than 400 companies that are its members, and therefore it is par excellence the home of all automotive businesses in Italy. And within ANFIA, there's the car design and engineering department that accounts for all the Italian design companies. And this is a very significant number, because in terms of GDP, design, automotive design accounts for about 1 billion in terms of turnover, and some 700 automotive businesses. So our group that today represents some 30 businesses is growing very fast, and it too is the shared home of Italian designers and engineers. In this respect, I'd like to show you a short video from which we can then move on, so you have a more holistic vision of our world.
Ecco dunque che in questo piccolo video avete.
So as you've seen from this short video, we have included some of the businesses, some of the companies. Some of them are historic names, some of them are newcomers, and we hope many others will join us and will contribute to the future steps. Since the design world is changing radically, and from physical design, it's evolving not so much toward digital design, but a very unusual world, which is the PHYGITAL world, so the union of digital and physical. We thought, as a car design engineering group, we'd decided to organize, coordinated by Luca Pellegrini, 3 of the top world experts of design, together with Minister Todde, to discuss this topic. So I'd introduce Gianluca Pellegrini, first of all. I thank him as I thank all the others. Hello, good day to you all. Yes, thank you. Angori has said that the world of the automotive sector is undergoing an extraordinary transformation, a change in paradigm, as we often say. The perception of consumers is changing, and the industrial approach is changing too. New technological challenges are coming to the fore, and it's not a simple revolution, because today we're seeing the systemic implications of this change, on how these implications are reverberating on the supply chain, the raw materials, and there are also the geopolitical premises. There's the need to disenfranchise ourselves from energy sources. And so looking further ahead, aside from the current crisis that we hope will close quickly and that the war will come to an end and find a solution, also because the consequences on the automotive world are already sufficiently dramatic, and they are summed to an emergency we've had over the last 2 years because of the pandemic, the semiconductor crisis. I mean, the automotive sector is moving through a very complex period, but we must think that these tensions sooner or later will come to an end, and therefore the evolutionary process of the mobility world will regain stimuli, will regain speed. New mobility models will come to the fore, new approaches to industrial design will be applied, new ways of creating experiences around a product that changes its essence and its goals. There will be, therefore, new businesses that will develop in parallel to traditional businesses. And the design process, too, will change. So today we'll try to understand what opportunities, what challenges may come from this change in a context which, as Angori was saying, will lead to a convergence between digital and physical models. And it also will lead to customer and user experiences that we've considered normal in consumer goods in our digital service world. We'll be able to transform the world of mobility too. We'll do this together with our panelists. Silvio introduced them rather quickly earlier, and I would like to present them again in some further detail. So, as we were saying, we have connected with us from Rome Vice Minister for Economic Development, Alessandra Todde, who should be online. I don't see her on the screen. Is she with us? Yes. Good morning, Vice Minister. Good day. Vice Minister and engineer, too. Is that right? Because, yes, I'm an IT engineer. I graduated from the University of Pisa, and she's been a businesswoman too in the technology area. She was also Under Secretary of State from September 2019 to the 13th of February 2021. And then Thomas Felger, who is a founding partner and managing director of Icon Group. He founded in 2003 the Icon Group that revolutionized markets with innovative strategies. As CEO of Icon Group, he oversees 2 entities, Icon Impact with an international innovation agency, and Icon Ventures, a 30 million venture capital fund that invests in initiatives that enable traditional companies to reinvent their business models for the future. Then next to me, Flavio Manzoni, Chief Design Officer of Manzoni. Perhaps not everybody knows that he started his career drawing sketches for automotive magazines, but not Quattro Ruote. We can't forgive you for that. It was a different magazine, but anyway, he graduated in architecture, specialized in industrial design, and he started in Lancia, then in Seat. He then returned to Fiat, then he went to Audi, and then he returned to the Italian world and became vice president at Ferrari in 2010. And instead, to my left, we have Harry West, professor of industrial design at Columbia University, New York. He's a professor now, so he's moved to the academic world. Previously, he'd been CEO of Frog, senior partner of Profit and of Continuum, so he worked in the industry for many, many years in the design field. He worked with many, many companies. Let me just mention some: American Express, BMW, AstraZeneca, Procter & Gamble, Tetra Pak. So basically, it's a highly varied career he's had. So starting our conversation, I'd like to take advantage of the deputy minister's presence. She's also an energy expert, our minister. So since I've spoken about what's happening around us today, to give a context to our panel, I'd like to immediately ask Engineer Todde the following. The war is obliging a number of European countries to reconsider a number of the features of its competitiveness: energy dependency, the supply chain, perhaps even the whole concept of globalization that we've taken for granted over the last 30 years. Now, how can Italy develop an energy policy that can ensure at the same time safety and also solid bases for development? Well, first of all, allow me to thank ANFIA and the Car Design and Engineering Group and Mr. Angori for having allowed me to take part in your discussion here today. I believe we're moving through a quite exceptional historic phase. We're emerging from 2 years of pandemic that certainly has weakened us, but we also have this other scenario, this geopolitical tension that is intensifying around us. And from the standpoint of sourcing, so I'm talking about energy, but also, for instance, about raw materials, the cost of oil products. This is something that is leading to great difficulty for many of our supply chains, especially the automotive one, which had already been previously impacted by a very deep transformation, as you said earlier. The model of mobility is changing substantially. At the Ministry of Economic Development, we also are in charge of smart city matters, and I see how there's a radical change taking place in terms of mobility. However, from my standpoint, it gives us the opportunity. I always tend to see the glass half full. This allows one to also look at the transformation of supply chains using our distinguishing levers. How is it we're different? We're different as made in Italy. Our products, our technology has become acclaimed throughout the world, especially the world of design, and we're acknowledged in that. So I believe that by focusing on these two differentiating factors, one can interpret this change, one can ensure that this supply chain that's inevitably changing, that it may somehow nevertheless become more resilient, even though I rather hate this overused word resilience, but that we should succeed in maintaining the values we've achieved. by transforming and becoming different. In this sense, technology can certainly help us enormously. It can help us to the extent that the concept of cars is changing, looking, for instance, at how present electronics have become within cars, looking, for instance, at the interaction with infrastructure, with the external world. This has become vital too. And all these are very important cues to ensure that our ability to design, our ability to be precursors, forerunners in testing these opportunities should give us the possibility of relaunching our supply chain. Obviously, up to some time ago, we'd hear about digital twin, therefore be able to experiment electronically. A prototype that was totally functional but virtual. And there's the metaverse and its opportunities, virtual reality. These are all worlds that allow us to amplify the theme of design, digital design, but especially make it increasingly integrated into the needs of the supply chain. And so it's true, as you were saying, we're experiencing a very critical phase in terms of energy, in terms of raw materials sourcing. But if interpreted correctly, this could be an acceleration factor, not necessarily something that destroys value. Acceleration, because to understand design in these terms, it places design in first line. What are the opportunities to transform the supply chain and make it somehow more performing compared to other models? I see this as a great opportunity to be able to somehow look to the future in a non-negative way, despite the fact that we have very many challenges ahead and the current situation not really giving us great peace of mind. What I consider to be important is to exploit our skills also to create systems compared to other industrial sectors. One of the things I've always seen as someone very interested is that the automotive sector has often been a forerunner of trends that then developed in other industrial sectors. And so here too, Italy must succeed in creating a system and create common denominators in other sectors to have more critical mass. I look at other countries because I don't like to bring coals to Newcastle. I see that France and Germany have great engineering, great design companies, and I think it's important for Italy too to express as a country these skills it has by creating a system, by creating a critical mass. So it's true, the supply chain is now undergoing changes, and the Ministry of Economic Development is setting up processes to support the supply chain. And for the ministry, I'm in charge of ecological transition, and therefore I'm very much in contact with the automotive business, and I know there's a deep transformation underway. But I see with great confidence the future, because if we don't hold on to past models only, and we try and exploit the opportunities of this new world that's increasingly integrated with technology, we may destroy some value, but we'll build new value, and the challenge is to create far more value than what we'd be losing.
Well, let me grasp the opportunity of these considerations. Networking, creating a system and enhance Italian skills and core competences. So what is the opportunity for Italy? Well, let us not forget that Italy is made of so many communes. In the past, mixing up Pisa and Livorno was an issue. So we used to look at the detail and be rather provincial. However, at this moment in time, we're facing a unique opportunity because it is from transitions that opportunities are born. And what's happening now in the world of design, in this radical transformation, we get the opportunity to create a network in design as a country, combining all the rooted skills and core competencies in one common home. And this is something that I discussed with the Deputy Minister several times. So the opportunity of creating a common home for the Made in Italy of design in Italy. Because that way we can truly grasp all available opportunities. The exchange of different experiences, this is the topic this morning, and it is to demonstrate that only diversity can generate the future. So moving away from our traditional provincialism and move towards these new opportunities, economic opportunities as well. I'm not a designer, and I look at things from a very simple perspective, that of figures. And I can see that transitions can generate opportunities, well-being, new jobs. And Thomas and Harry, I'm sure, will elaborate on this and will share a number of things regarding this. So based on the analysis of what's happening, we can set the direction for the future. And we must create the conditions for the companies that are part of this sector to compete on an equal footing. For example, dismantling barriers that prevent us from being agile. But, I mean, there's an incredible talent there. At ANFIA, for example, we have promoted an hackathon on design because we want to attract world talents to Italy in design and engineering. I do believe that our country has something distinctive to offer, a kind of imprinting of Italian design which is not confined to our people, to Italians, but something that opens up to the world. We did it a year ago. We're launching it now. So this is our goal, opening up to the world, because it's diversity that can generate new opportunities. So that will happen in 2022 too. All right, then let's organize a call to action. Yes, that's why we decided to involve people who are not limited to the Italian reality. We involved schools from all over the world so as to make sure that the most promising talents are attracted by Italy. They are already doing it, but they can do it more. And they should find what they look for. And that is going to turn into an advantage for Italy too. Flavio, but what do you think? Are we the Italian, let's say, tradition or schools of design, are they losing ground or disappearing? Well, I don't think so. For example, in Ferrari, in our small reality, we always try to look forward with a vision, but without forgetting our DNA and what it means to breathe Italian design culture on a daily basis. We are lucky, and yes, we can draw inspiration from so many cultural, artistic stimuli. The culture of beauty. Yes, the culture of beauty. I think it's a reality. Of course, there are ups and downs, and there are companies who open up to globalization, and sometimes taste tends to, let's say, lessen that drive, that creative drive, that propulsive drive that one must nurture every day. As Silvio knows, yeah, you must really renew that every day, and the goal of Pininfarina is exactly that. It's really to continue to drive an Italian vision of design. Now, I don't want to go into design. Well, in Italy, we do have a special approach to the design of cars, for example, to the design of the shell, which should be enhanced, though, with different tools compared to the past, but with, congruency. We'll certainly come back to that. We mentioned several times the future and the test of the future. Let's tackle this topic. From so many sources, the bet is that cars are going through a commoditization process. And thinking of the basic process underlying that, priority will be given to the use of cars. And it's not by chance that all manufacturers seem to be willing to transform into mobility suppliers. Let me ask this question to all of you. Is this truly the destiny of the car business?
Is the future of the car business to be commodity mobility suppliers? That's your question?
Exactly.
So, well, yes and no. So, yes, I'm sure that we'll continue to need mobility. And the way that mobility is delivered, the way it's used by us will change, as it has over the centuries. And today, I hardly ever use a car. My lifestyle is mostly on trains and Uber, or the equivalent of Uber, Lyft, which is a kind of kinder, gentler Uber in the United States. So I'm in vehicles, but it's not that but I'm probably not driving that vehicle. I live in a big city. There's really no need to own a car if you're living in Manhattan. It's more of a nuisance than a benefit. But I travel a lot. And my experience traveling is very important to me. And I can imagine that in the future, I will be more particular about the brand and experience in the mobility that is applied to me. And I think that is one of the great opportunities. I will always own a car because I will need that potential to travel by myself. But it will become less utilitarian, perhaps, for me, and more of an expression of who I am as a person. And then when I'm using a shared vehicle, I would like that shared vehicle to also feel like it's mine in that moment. And that's kind of a new challenge for us. It's not the design of a commodity vehicle that is sold to somebody that is used by him or her personally and probably alone for 3 to 6 years. But it's the design of a vehicle that can be shared and that is owned by you in that moment when you're in it. That's a very, very different design problem that I'm sure some of my colleagues are wrestling with right now.
It's a huge question, actually. First of all, I think what we all have to understand is that as a car brand or manufacturer, it's not anymore given that you're the only one who compete in this environment. I think there's so many new brands, like Uber or whatever, like we discussed, or new ones coming up, who easily can provide a vehicle now and can manufacture it. There's so many white label companies out there where you can actually just ask for, hey, produce me 1 million cars. Here's the specs, here's what I need. So I think the car manufacturers have to understand that selling a car is not their main task anymore. It's really about what is the experience by buying this brand. What do you provide as Ferrari, as whatever brand? And it has to be way more than the car in the future. The kids, I mean, we do a lot with younger generation kind of people and trying out different models with our brands we're working with. And that's from Asia to America to Europe. And what I can say is that the design of the car is less and less important to these people. That's not saying that there will be people who are ambitious to own a Ferrari, whatever, it's an emotional thing. But the major task for us is now to create an experience which people want to buy into. So if I buy, let's say, a BMW, what does BMW stand for? Is BMW a sporty brand? Do I get a fitness club access with it? Do I get access to sport events with it because I own the BMW? That doesn't mean that I own the BMW physically, but I'm owning a digitally BMW experience. The other thing, which is nobody actually talked about it, because what we discussed is still the old model of manufacturing. When you talk, and changing the value chain or whatever. We live in a world where my kids, 20, 16, have more than 50% of their time they live digitally. And you know what? They want to present themselves digitally as well. They want to own a digital car. They want to own digital handbags. I mean, Gucci just sells handbags for more money digitally than the real one that you buy physically. It's a real market. So there is a place where Ferrari can sell a digital car, which you maybe pay only 500 euros for it. But then it's on your social channels with you. You can say, look, I own this car. It's owned by me. I can resell it, but it's digitally. And I can take it maybe from a game to another game or whatever. And therefore, I have a better experience in the game. And we should not forget that this digital experience will be more important in the future than the real physically one. And this is something we didn't address yet, and I think that's something really important to understand.
Angori?
And it's exactly the reason why we have created this event this morning. I deeply and firmly believe that physical design will continue to exist for sure, but the transition I was mentioning before is a digital transition. We'll be increasingly living in that world, and that will influence the way physical cars are conceived. And that is why those who are involved in design must really dive into that, must embrace that new world. It's something totally unexpected. However, what we should never lose is, of course, the essence of your own roots. Otherwise, it becomes a blurred blend. If we think of an electric car that has 60–70% fewer components compared to a regular car, it's much more difficult to draw a distinction between one brand and the other. And that means that distinction must come from the concept of these cars, and that is deeply affected by the digital. This is the true transition, and companies dealing with design and technology are tackling that, and is what Thomas was referring to. That is the challenge of the future. Well, now you are, of course, directly involved, because think of NFT about a Ferrari. Well, would that be possible, or will there be a demarcation line between mass market and a more elite world? Of course, I can't think of commoditization of cars, only cars as a means of transport or as an extension of your own home. I mean, there's always an emotional factor binding the person to the car, and we shouldn't forget about that. So it'll lead to a sort of pluralism of applications, making it even more interesting. I also believe that the virtual world, the world of the metaverse, will play a key role and will become key in both owning and driving a car. And why not for Ferrari as well? And indeed, we are working at something linked to that. And I can't mention it because you're a journalist, and I have to be very careful at what I'm disclosing. Well, what I do in my life counts very little. You'll forget about everything we say, all right. Of course, we must be very sensitive to the so-called weak signals, whatever leads to a transformation about the way we relate to cars. We should always be very, very open to that. And the digital world will play a very important world, well, from now onwards, but even now, no doubt about that. Just think about the film by Spielberg, already Play One, which was really pioneering. It shows us where we're heading for, and there's a certain amount of realism in what he figured out. The passion and irrationality linked, associated to cars, could that be replicated in virtual too? Why not? There are so many symbolic, emotional aspects connected to cars. Let me give you an example. With my 12-year-old son, I was talking about cars, and he was displeased that he will not be able to drive a thermal car. But that's his dream, and he's just 12 years old, and so you would expect other things. Yes, I think if, he'll get his license in just 6 years, he may have that opportunity. And when he plays with Gran Turismo, digital games, there's always that fun to drive, the wish for emotions, that visceral relation with the car. Another question. Well, for decades, the entire Western society has pursued the myth of mass car driving. But there are so many signs that things are changing and that the idea of mobility democratization is losing some of its meaning. Is that the case, or is just my, strange idea?
Democratization. So the right of any individual to travel independently. So I don't think that is going to diminish. I think that, if anything, that's going to increase. We've lived with that right and that privilege in the United States and Europe for the last close to 100 years, and we're seeing that right and privilege extending to other parts of the world right now. But let me go back to another example of a movie, Flavio. I mean, inspired by your citing of Ready Player One. So, but if we go back in the United States to the world in the, I would say post-World War period, but we're not quite sure which World War we're talking about right now. But in the 1950s, and really the kind of the role of the car was most clearly communicated in the movie American Graffiti. about how central the car was to young people at that time. It's where they wanted to live, it's where they wanted to meet people, it's where they wanted to meet women, meet the opposite sex, have sex, form relationships. It was central to how people thought about the kind of right of adulthood. And I think that to some extent the car industry was built on that myth. It was necessary for us as individuals to flourish, to find a partner. But today, how we live is different. We don't live in our cars in the same way. We live in our cell phones. That's where we meet people. That's where we form relationships. And so I think we have to acknowledge that the kind of preeminent role of the automobile has changed. We'll still need it for transportation, but as the kind of icon of identity for young people, I think, as my colleagues just described it, it's going away. We can already see that in the statistics in the United States, where there's been about a 10% decline in the number of young people with driver's licenses. You don't need a driver's license as much today as you did. But I don't think that means that the automobile is going to go away. It just means that its role is different. And that as we think about the design of the automobile, the vital role of design is going to be just as important in the future. But the challenge is going to be different. How do you enable somebody to have that experience that they have when they're living in their cell phone, as most of us do, in a car, even if they don't legally own that car? Mm-hmm. How can you take that kind of seamlessness of experience that we have with our cell phone and extend that to the automobile? Mm-hmm. How do you take the very rapid evolution of experience that we enjoy every year with our digital experiences and extend that to something which has got a physical life of 6 to 20 years? And these are new challenges in automobile design that I think we're just beginning to come to grips with.
I mean, this is, I cannot agree more, but in addition to that, we have to rethink also from a financial point of view how this works, right? Because, I mean, we're working right now on a car which is supposed to hit the market like a phone, where you get the car more or less for free, and you pay for features on the way. So you want to have, I don't know, you have a certain, let's say you want to go in a city and you want to have a valid parking because you need to go shopping, but there is no parking space. You pay maybe 15 euros and the car takes care about it, and you pay the 15 euros there, right? And so you pay by the use of the car, whatever. This changes also everything. It changes the experience, it changes how you design the car, everything. And then I want to come back to one more thing. This digital experience, like taking a Ferrari, for example, and this is happening now, right? We already brought Ford or BMW in a game. Do you know the game Rocket League by any chance? Do you know it? So
I'm too old.
So that's true. A lot of people say that, but it's our job to know it. Because Rocket League is a game where cars play football against each other. So as Italian and German, we should know about it, right? Football and cars. What else do we have? So we should really know about it. And these cars play in a three-dimensional room, they play football, or in America, soccer. This game is played by 800 million people every day. You can buy, for Ford and BMW, new rims on your car. You can buy a new spoiler. You can add certain things and you buy for it. Think about, if you have a Ferrari in this game, and you sell to 800 million people every day, one rim, one spoiler, for 50 cents, for €1, this changes everything. Because if some of your competitors sell there and are successful with that, they make more money in this game than with a model they bring out physically. And so we have to really bring this together, because if we miss out one or the other, we miss a huge chance to be financially really sustainable and can actually add to all of these future experiences. And that's why I think it's really, really important, no matter how old we are, we have to surround us with people who know that place. Because when you say you want to attract designers, young designers, they want to do this stuff. They want to design maybe a physical thing, yes, but they also want to design digitally a crazy car or a crazy thing. And only then you will get these really good designers.
Yeah. Però, e questo è il tema vero, che le aziende di design...
This is the real issue. I mean, companies that are design companies that are maybe 100 years old, this is what they are facing today. And that's why I can't sleep at night. I'm trying to imagine this future, in particular my company, but also as association of designers. How can one imagine, with the experience and the work of the past, how we can imagine these new opportunities, because that's where the world's going, and it's going at a speed that, in my opinion, has been accelerated by these last 2 years of the pandemic, because technology has really accelerated incredibly. And these thoughts are not things you read about in the newspapers or even in the specialized press, because these are issues that are difficult to understand, unfortunately. They're not that immediate to understand. But there's one thing I'd like to point out, and that is companies must imagine the future to survive. It's simple survival. And they also have the social responsibility companies must have. This is another issue that becomes very important. It's the decisions that companies are taking now in these sophisticated milieus that the future of many people depends on, the people that are connected to them. Well, then how can one ensure the sustainability of the business model, the jobs that depend on the business model? The scenario changes completely. What we've experienced so far, we really should put aside, forget about. Well, no, not really. First of all, I'd like to say this. Amongst the most flexible people in the world, there are designers and engineers. Even that would seem to be an oxymoron. But in actual fact, well, we also have a vice minister up there who's an engineer, but they've learned so much. All of us, I mean, bear in mind, I'm a physicist, so I belong to people who have studied all sorts of things, to be ready, however, to abandon those things and learn new ones. So to talk about design or engineers who must embrace what's new, if they don't do it, I don't know who else can. But in this transition, certainly, let's imagine the people who model clay for physical models of cars, mock-ups of cars. They already today have skills, capabilities that marry what they've learnt for decades, that belong to the companies they've always worked for, and the new possibilities that their skills offer them, because the transition from physical to digital is not per se an unsurmountable obstacle. In fact, it's something fairly easy to achieve. When you talk about reskilling, and that's why we talked about it, actually, I remember a few months ago with the Vice Minister Todde, the need for reskilling. Reskilling is essential. People are capable of learning new things, but they've got to see what they are. Well, let's ask the Vice Minister once again to tell us her thoughts, first of all, because she's an engineer. So how can one combine this transition from a digital world and social sustainability? This is something we're going to have to face. Well, first of all, you said that we're certainly changing. We're passing from one model to another, from possession to use in terms of mobility. But I agree with the fact that this doesn't change the need to be able to sell the experiential part, that is, be able to work on the experiential part. That's going to be increasingly important, both because of the possibility we'll have to improve the quality of mobility and transport, the quality of my experience as I move from one place to another. And so this obviously gives different opportunities because on the one hand, for instance, I see the transformation of car dealers who are becoming service suppliers today. They've expanded their range of activities enormously, but I see this also in the fact that, yes, it's true, according to the new concept of mobility, cars have 70% components less, but how much more Internet of Things, how much more infotainment, how much more does it have to be integrated with the infrastructure? And so this transition of competence is important, because if we are capable of interpreting within these new supply chains the possibility of moving from the production of components to the production of new modes that allow us to use cars differently. You're talking about NFTs. This is creating enormous opportunities also in the metaverse. And so what I see is a change in the model, but I also see enormous opportunities that open up in a different context. So the challenge will be skills shortage. We already today have a shortage in terms of these skills. And so the task of someone who governs and governs well is to ensure that the skills are more accessible building bricks, that is, through which these new skills, these new opportunities can develop. And in all this, the fact of also having a design that's changing and therefore takes into account that the concept of car is being totally transformed as well. So within a vehicle, I pay more attention to entertainment, for instance, than interaction with the outside world, or extending it as a workplace. I mean, I could give you 1,000 different examples, but this also gives you the possibility of having 1,000 different options to create commonalities between our design and engineering skills. So yes, I do see it as being an enormous challenge, but I also see great opportunities if we focus on the skills that we need today. They're not necessarily manual skills, but digital skills that our company must invest in heavily. Thank you. So basically, we're saying that the mass market is going towards a commodization concept. Let me go back to what Mr. West was saying earlier. I mean, how can one acquire skills in an environment that we're moving towards time-based ownership? How can design and the values that we human beings recognize in design, how can all this be combined with instant use concepts? Perhaps Mr. West and then Flavie. I mean, how can one make oneself or own an environment that you only have for a very short period of time?
I think that this is perhaps the most important challenge in front of the car industry, personally. As the Vice Minister put it, the concept of a car is changing. And the old concept of the car as like the icon of adulthood, the personal expression, the ownership of that car being a personal expression, may change for many people. And perhaps that expression will only be important when you're in the car, not when it's sitting there on the street. And right now, we don't have good ways for you to feel like you own that experience in a car unless you also own the car. And I personally think that is one of the big challenges ahead of the industry is to solve that problem. And we can see this in how some of the car sharing services are trying to compete. So you get into the car and you immediately take control as a passenger of the lighting and the music in the car and other aspects of that. You immediately connect your journey to, if you want, to a loved one or somebody you trust, so that you feel safe in that experience. And so we can see, like, the first weak signals of how when you get into a vehicle that you don't own, it becomes your own in that moment. Just like, this is probably not as true in Italy, because I think in Italy, people tend to stay in their home longer. But in the United States, people move their house probably on average every 7 years or so. And so, in some senses, that house is not theirs, because other people will have lived in it before and other people will live in it afterwards. But in that time that you're in it, you furnish it, you arrange it. In that time, it is yours. And it takes on your identity. And then you take that identity with you when you move to another house. I anticipate that is how we'll be living in our cars in the future. But it won't be done with furniture, it'll be done digitally. We'll enter the car, it'll take on our identity, we'll enjoy the journey, and then we leave and we'll take that identity with us.
Flavio e poi Thomas. Come si fa a rendere proprio un ambiente che occupi per un certo periodo di tempo? Dal punto di vista del design proprio.
From the standpoint of design, of solutions, how can you make a car yours when you only own it, so to say, for short periods? Well, standardization mustn't lead to making things trite or banal. It always depends on what you're designing. The work of a designer should always be that of delving into the basics of a project. If you're not talking about a Ferrari, thinking about an object that has to be created for car sharing, for episodic periods, momentaneous periods, there'll be all sort of issues linked to proxemics. But that doesn't mean losing sight of giving a unique connotation, and therefore also create an experience that you feel embracing. As a designer, I can't only think of homologation, and then unfortunately homologation tends to be something that does happen in the car world as in many other worlds, but the issue is to ensure that the strong contents of a project emerge and give the product its own connotation so it can be experienced as a unique experience. Well, if we're talking about a sharing world in the future, shouldn't one design cars that are specifically designed to be shared rather than use the cars that we have every day and that we can buy off the shelf? I mean, we transform into sharing objects cars that have been conceived to be used privately. Shouldn't one instead rethink totally the object itself? Well, that's already something that's underway. Do you think there's any sense to that?
I'd like to respond to your point about commoditization. And I don't think this necessarily leads to commoditization. In fact, perhaps the opposite. Because when you think about our clothing, for example, if I had to commit to one style of clothing for the next 3 years, it would probably be like what I'm wearing right now, actually kind of dull, straightforward, semi-professional clothing. But I don't, and I can change my clothing several times a day if I want to. And so that means that I can have quite extravagant clothing when I'm going out in the evening, and very rough clothing when I'm working in the yard. So perhaps when we're car sharing, we can go the same way. I personally would be unlikely to own a Ferrari, partly because I can't afford to own one, but also it's just not my style. But I would love to own a Ferrari sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so in this new world, I can imagine owning a Ferrari for a short period of time if you let me do that. And I would delight, and I think there would be billions of people out there who would enjoy that for a short period of time.
I didn't want to be misunderstood. My intent. No, cioè, io sto dicendo, parlo in italiano, no?
Well, I don't want to be misunderstood. What I'm saying is that whatever product one's talking about, even one that's been designed to be used for sharing purposes, there's the possibility of creating strong connotations and strong involvement. If I go to a hotel, my room is used by other people too, but there are different ways to design the room. Would you like to add something?
There's two ways, right? There will be products, very aspirable, like a Ferrari, like whatever. And I think there's a world where these products will be there, as you said. You want to own like only for a small period, have the chance to feel it, whatever. That will be there. I really believe that, and I think it will not go away. There will be these brands out there, but when it comes to the bigger market, whatever, I think the experience, and I cannot hear it anymore, the experience, but it really is the best word to describe when you want to get your own world with you. So for example, think about, this is the things we will be working on, right? Think about all the car sharing in the world, whatever, and you have a little band here on your wrist or whatever, it's on your phone or whatever it is, and you enter something. It doesn't matter which car it is, but because of that, your radio stations are set, your seat is set, your ambient, whatever you wanted from a lighting point of view, from whatever, it's just set because it's coming with you, right? You don't have to put in all the stuff. I mean, you don't have to, when you do a share now thing or whatever, and somebody put Korean into the navigation system, you need a half an hour before you can start a car because you don't know how to change language. All of this will be gone because it just comes with you. You enter the car knows you, things are changing. And this is where the car manufacturer in the future have a lot to do in sense of having all these different, now talking technology, KPI, like APIs, SDKs to adapt so that other people can just, wherever they come from, can easily step in and get their setup they want. And again, for me, the future will have so much more than we just discussed because we're just starting. I mean, we're learning now about new brands coming up like we never heard about. I mean, we're working with brands out of China, whatever, you have no idea that they exist. And they suddenly start to do certain things. You're like, what? Do you know, for example, what is the #1 feature in China you have to have if you want to sell a car? You know why Volkswagen has a huge problem with the ID cars, the electric cars in China? What do you think, what feature do they miss? Why they're not selling the car? What is
Sound.
Sound? It's close. Come on, one more guess. It's the karaoke feature.
What?
Karaoke feature.
Karaoke.
If you don't have
Well, some
karaoke,
kind of sound.
if you don't have karaoke in the car, they're not interested in buying your car. Even 10 euro, 10,000 euro cars will have in China the karaoke feature. So you as a big brand, right? You build a nice car, you do everything right. But you miss the karaoke feature. And guess what? Because you build the car the way you build it, you cannot just add it. It's impossible.
That's crazy.
So,
that's crazy that you can't add it.
you can't add it.
That is so backwards.
I know it's backwards, but that's exactly what I mean with what we're discussing right now. The world is so rapidly changing that we should never think about, oh, this is the end scenario, or now if we do this, we did it right. We should think we will never be finished. We have to build whatever we build in a way that it's so open that we can always tap into it and change things. And we have to listen to user experience. We have a lot of German I'm not talking about Italian now because Italian is great. So we in Germany, when we go to our board, to the automotive sector, and we go to the board members, and we tell them, hey, create a karaoke feature. Hey, do a Twitch channel into the car. You know, they were laughing. They were laughing. They're not taking this serious. But these little kind of things make a huge difference. And that's just the beginning. Because if you don't get the karaoke feature right, how do you want to get the rest right? So that's my concern a little bit, and this is our job to help and do. But in a way, and now I say something really bad, in a way, we need to get to the next generation of top managers who have a little bit more of this digital feeling with them and have experienced more in this world. Because it's an uphill battle to tell people who coming from a world where the engine is everything and all, where every little piece of the engine is a masterpiece and that's all it counts. And for me, it's also, I'm a petrolhead, I love that too. But it's not it's not a concern anymore.
Quindi c'è un problema di cultura aziendale, chiamiamolo così. Io ricordo tra l'altro che
So there's an issue of, let's say, business culture. I remember, for example, that there's a majority of mechanical engineering companies. Yes, can you hear, Professor? Yeah, all right, perfect, good, all right.
I have to agree, Thomas. There is the trouble with the car industry, in my experience, is that the people in the industry love cars, whereas most people don't love cars as much as that. And so the people in the industry center the experience around the car, whereas regular people, the people who actually buy the cars, they want the experience centered around themselves and about what they want to do. You had that experience with going to top management around karaoke. I had the same experience going to top management at probably the same company 25 years ago about cup holders and people in America wanting to drink and eat in their car. And this is one of the top German brands.
I know.
Whose response was,
know very well.
Well, they shouldn't. But that doesn't work in the United States. People want to eat and drink in a car. So if you don't design it so that people can eat and drink in the car, they're not going to buy your car.
But let me add one more thing to that. Can you imagine what a battle it is to say to a car manufacturer, you don't need a button for seat heating anymore? Like, it's mission impossible. There is a whole department for this button who you set the seat heating, right? Which it's so easy to digitalize, right?
Yeah.
Because if it's a certain amount of degree, probably you don't need a seat heating button, right? So you can do this very simple. But no, there's 10 people behind that button, so it stays there. And that's just this is the reality right now.
Yeah. So exactly. And so my experience is that we have an industry that may be fighting to control aspects of that experience that ultimately have now left their control. It's gone. It's gone to our cell phones. And is not paying as much attention as perhaps they should be to other aspects of the experience that can remain within their control and that would actually make the experience of being in the car better. But the way you get there is by acknowledging the centrality of our identity, which is through our mobile devices.
There's a really good analogy. Think about years back, mobile carriers, mobile telecommunication companies. They could own mobile payment, mobile advertisement. They could own that. If they were open-minded at that time and would have started to create standards and be open-minded, they would own that. Now, what are mobile carriers right now? They're just dumb pipes. You don't care which carrier. You care the phone you have, but the rest, you don't care. You just want to have a speed, right? It must be fast. It must be somehow, the coverage should be good. But what brand? You don't care. This could have been totally different at that time. And I think the car industry is, in a way, kind of in a certain position right now. They have to make a decision. Do I be just a dumb mobility provider by providing the hardware? Or do I do more and create more about this mobility aspect when it comes to experiences, etc.?
C'è un problema di cultura aziendale?
Is there an issue of business culture there? Well, it is a fact that the world of design, supplying design services to car manufacturers, among others, well, clearly, we need to grapple with those who actually dictate the service they want to receive. I mean, not all of them are ready to accept the new which is coming, and this is real. And both Harry and Thomas were emphasizing it that before, though there isn't great openness to listen to the new, because there's a deep transformation in progress, and I've been in this business for 30 years. I mean, I've never seen such a radical change as is happening now, and not all are ready to accept that this change is happening. And that is not just related to the people who must take and must make the ultimate decision, because those who must make the ultimate decision are often ready to take the new because they realize the consequences of not embracing the new. The real issue stays with the intermediate management, because they sort of defend their positions. If I'm in charge of a system and I know that it's bound to disappear in the future, well, I'm now referring, for example, let me think of moving from electronic injection. If I was an expert of carburetors and I designed that all over my life, well, I am, let's say I'm not the CEO of a company, but I do control an important part of the engine. Well, I might, resist the new because I'm not ready, I'm not able to grapple with it. So we shouldn't be concerned with those who make the ultimate decisions, but the intermediate layer. That's a big issue in business culture. And it's, I think, one of the biggest obstacles. I have a design question for you. Software experience, so we heard about it. Tesla was an incredible disruptor in the car business in the past few years, and their communication was based on, well, apart from the technologies they adopted, and many other manufacturers are inspired by that, but also more silly things. But when it comes to designing cars, they design traditional cars. Well, the new car is a 3-box car, 4 doors Model 3, 3 boxes, 4 doors, and then another version came. Why is design so difficult to change? Why are we still bound to traditional design? Well, I'm asking you because at Ferrari, you certainly pressed the pedal of the accelerator towards the future, and some people were a bit dismal. So why is it so challenging? Why technological development is not immediately followed by morphological changes? I think it's a matter of cultural, let's say, resistance. Whether that is implicit or passive, I don't know. In some cases, courage is lacking. Think of electric cars, for instance, and the implications of technological transitions in that respect. So formal change in the sense of product identity can be radical too, but there are so many aspects which lead you to be more conservative. For example, taste. It's a matter of taste homologation, of cultural trends, both in your company. What Silvio was saying is quite evident. There are, let's say, powers in a company which, exert a certain pressure. And in marketing, the tendency is, of course, to use tried and tested models. So how to promote a breakthrough, how to generate a form, a concept which is radically different. When we're faced with an electric car, for instance, well, it is just, the way designers in the 60s and 70s, when they revolutionized from transistor, the world of the radio. So there was a peak of creativity, and new archetypes were generated, and they're still very modern. They still go very strong, and it's what we should do in the car business too. So we should really break existing patterns linked to a certain type of tradition and understand that there are huge opportunities out there. So I don't know what are the reasons behind certain decisions by major brands. Well, I mean, electric cars very much follow the example of thermal cars. However, they do not represent the potential, the full potential of an electric car.
We already kind of the future and how people react to it. If you take Tesla as an example, right? The Tesla S, how old is it now? 10 years?
12.
Yeah,
12
years.
12 years. Didn't change the design, right? How many models has BMW created in that time for each of these things? So this is a lot of cost savings, by the way, right? Not coming up with all these models every time. It's a 12-year-old design. And the only thing they do is software updates, like on a phone, right? Like on a phone. A new app comes up, new whatever. And people still have the feeling it's a new thing. Still the feeling. And I think what the traditional brands have to learn, and I think it's always a good thing to steal with pride, If something works, steal with pride. It's not like, why not? They stole also a lot of ideas. So steal from them as well. And when you bring in a new EV and you do certain things, think about that. Think about what it takes to make a car attractive to people. Because I, by myself, have now 3 generations of Teslas. And I'm really a petrolhead. So I own Porsche, whatever, all of these things. But when you sit in there, like when we talk to BMW, whatever, they tell me, okay, you know what? The door doesn't close as much as in a Tesla, right? And their doors are way better. Who cares? I don't care. I really don't. Like, I don't even recognize it, right? The way of that I don't have to go to a dealership, that they come to me. If something is, they fix it, they come to me. I don't have to do anything, right? I don't spend time at the dealership for oil change and all these things, whatever. And having then going in the morning to the car and there's a new feature with new games where I can, with my PlayStation controller, I can play the game. My kids are excited, right? So I always have excitement, always, every 3 months, every whatever, there's new excitement, whatever. And I don't understand why after all these years, the car manufacturers don't understand there is something more than a new design of a car from the outside, a new whatever, that it has really to do with the experience. And it's really, for me, mind-blowing, because it's not a concept, a theoretical concept. You see it working. I mean, they're not doing bad, they're doing really well. And so I don't understand why we still have to discuss this and still have to prove it, because it's already out there.
No, scusate, io volevo approfittare, volevo coinvolgere.
Yes, let me also address to the Vice Minister. Well, Mr. Angori mentioned the word policymaker. For the policymaker, the future is an opportunity. Is that really the case from your perspective? Well, the key issue here is understanding how to catch the value of what you are transforming and what is transforming. So policymakers should understand too that time has come to move from conventional components, innovation, to software, for instance. So it's really a changing paradigm, as you said before, even in design. As a user, for example, I see that the process design is lacking. I get into a car, I have a standard navigator, and I have needs that the navigator cannot meet. And I'm sure just, that happens to billions of other people. I lived in the US for long, and what I can tell you is that the European brands, I can remember European brand could not sell its cars in the States because the container for beverage was too small. And you said it already. So what policymakers should do at this moment in time is to make access to the new competencies, to the new opportunities easier. Increase the landscape of companies that can support car designers in scaling up, because a big resistance to change also stems from the lack of skills and competences. If I have a defined model and I know it's scalable, it's industrialized, I know that there are so many companies that can make it for me and I can do it competitively. If instead I, have the choice of acting, of moving to contexts where that scalability is not ensured, I may not do it. So we have the duty as policymakers to create a world with the right skills, with the right competencies to scale up, and also give the opportunity to companies who are growing new models, giving them the opportunity to have the tools to scale up quickly and be competitive. We should truly play the role of guiding this transition, not dissipating value, but instead creating new values. Flavio, what about beverage, let's say, holders? Do you have them in fair? Yes, they're a must. They've been a must, and they must be of the right size. So it's a generational issue, too. Is that the case? New generations have a different approach to mobility, to cars, and once they start working and start making decisions, they are bound to change the products they'll put onto the market, Harry?
Yeah, it is a whole new generation, and it's clear that the young will own the future, because that's just demographics for you. It's how it works, and young people think differently, and we probably need to get to grips with that quickly. It was very eye-opening for me, because I was an academic 25 years ago, and then I left academia to go into the design world, and I practiced as a designer and as a design leader for the last 25 years, and then I rejoined academia. So 25 years ago, I was immersed in the world of students from the ages of 18 to 27 or thereabouts, and now I'm re-immersed in that world, and I see the stark change that has happened. Today, clearly the number one issues in the minds of my students are the environment and equity, social equity. And this is not just young people being young people. This is fundamental to how they see the world in the United States. A growing recognition that there's an environmental catastrophe coming at us, and then it's the fault of, unfortunately, my generation for not doing anything about it.
Yeah, yours.
Yeah, thank you. I acknowledge we should have done something, we didn't, and we have left a complete mess for the next generation.
Yeah.
And that our country was built on social injustice in the United States, and that we have to acknowledge that, and we have to do our best to remedy the problems that social injustice has caused in our society. That is probably true in many other parts of the world, but I can speak from the point of view of the United States. And this is fundamental right now.
Just to add on this, sorry to interrupt, but when we have job interviews, we cannot show that what we do has some of this impact, right? But it has to be sustainable background. It's like having internet connectivity.
Yeah.
Everything has an impact, has to have an impact. If we cannot answer this question, then we are not one of the employers, then we are out.
Yeah. It's absolutely fundamental now in terms of what jobs young people will take, what they think is important in their lives. I still think that we're all very naive in how we address that. We don't really understand the impact that actually solving environmental problems are going to cause in our lives. We don't really understand what it means to redress social inequity. But we're coming to grips with it. And I can imagine that for the automobile industry, that is going to be a significant challenge. We don't know how to design the environment into an automobile, concerns for the environment. Yeah, Tesla is probably the poster child for the most successful, extraordinary business story that is built around the very simple idea of clearly distinguishing one brand from all of the others. There is the entire world automobile industry, and then there is Tesla, and that is different. And that has made the purchasing decision very, very simple. So in addition to the experience of driving the car, it's also made the purchasing decision very, very simple for people who can afford it.
Free options.
So I can go, all of them, which are internal combustion engines, even if they're not, it's too complicated for me to figure it out. Or I can go with Tesla, where the story is very simple. And so that is, I think, an early indication of the enormous impact that environmental concern is going to have on our industry in the future. And we've yet to figure out how to do that around social equity. And by the way, equity doesn't mean equality. It just means acknowledging the inequities in this world and being open and transparent about it rather than hiding it.
Allora, il concetto di equità sociale
The concept of social equity goes hands in hands with sustainability, that in advanced societies is a collective value. Recently, I was struck by the words of the CEO of BlackRock, one of the largest investment companies in the world, who said, "We focus on sustainability not because we're environmentalists, but because we are capitalists." And so this takes me back to what Professor West was saying. I mean, is it possible to marry the concept of sustainability and that of social equity? I don't want to be too philosophical, but certainly this is something that should perhaps be considered. Perhaps Harriet Thomas can give us a hand in answering.
Absolutely, because I think right now, when you look at where the big funds are, right, it's insurance funds of America and whatever, they all have to prove now that they go in the right direction in order to get the money, in order to get whatever. So if you can show a program which is sustainable and does this kind of things where the checkboxes are for the companies like BlackRock are there, then you have a way easier way to get money from the market than any other company. I mean, in Germany, for example, all the DAX companies, right, the top stock exchange companies, were all degraded from American investments because they have not enough sustainability projects running. So there's a huge push now in Germany, not because they like it, but they have to. Otherwise, there is no stock market money coming in their direction. No. And I think that's a good push, by the way. I think that's really necessary. But I believe in it, yes, and I think what we do right now in every project, not only because of our employees, but also because of our clients, if we don't think in this direction, we don't do a good job.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And we've been talking about issues around the environment and social equity as if they're two separate issues. But actually, there's considerable overlap around them. Recent studies have shown that the overwhelming carbon impact in the world comes not from rich countries, but from rich people. It comes from rich people in the United States, which is a rich country, but also rich people in China, which is not as rich a country, or rich people in Indonesia, which is a developing country. It's less about the wealth of the country as a whole and more about the wealth of the individual. And so we can see that addressing the issue of the environment is also going to be dependent on addressing some of the issues around social inequality, social inequity. And we're going to have to, my students are right, you know. they blame our generation. And it's not just because we didn't do anything about it, but they can also see that we have the money and they don't, because they're young. And because we have the money, we are burning much, much more carbon than they are. The amount of carbon you burn is very much in proportion to the amount of money you spend.
Stavo vedendo il vice ministro che stava annuendo sul concetto, sull'equazione tra equità sociale e sostenibilità. I due valori possono andare assieme. Era per il vice ministro.
Does the Vice Minister agree on this? Yes, I agree. I agree totally. But there's a further point. This change in paradigm, this paradigm shift, the fact of seeing the topic of sustainability that's becoming, as you said, a capitalistic issue, but also to see how the issue of globalization has changed completely recently too in its perception, the super chain and everything that's impacted by globalization. All this must be considered also very differently, because this impacts the way we live, we produce, it impacts the way in which the economic tissue is developing. We're coming back to talk about proximity. So on the one hand, we have the responsibility of coming to agreements with the new generations, ensuring that our production models that we're developing be transformed in some way and should also meet these new requirements. And in this sense, we as policymakers must have the necessary drive to take everything we have in terms of funding and focus it on all the supply chains that can produce value, not just software, for instance, but think of the microchip shortage and what it's led to in the automotive business. We in Europe, I use an American word, we were laggards for a long, long time in terms of producing microchips, always thinking somebody else could deal with that, whereas instead there is plenty of space still available. I'm thinking of batteries, for instance, the infrastructure required by new mobility systems. All these are opportunities to create value that we cannot neglect. So what I really see is the need to take the stimulus of transformation, not so much to sweep the dust under the carpet, but rather to try and move our country ahead in a direction in which it can be competitive, and this because of its skills. I mean, the fact that we come first in terms of innovating, designing, in terms of imagining the creation of new things, this is something that I think can lead us to be leaders of this change as well. Flavio, after everything we've said, how will life on board change? Well, certainly new technologies will well-being on board still have room, and what will the evolution of the human-machine interface be? What is it you're working on? Well, for instance, we're also working a lot of augmented reality, what this opportunity can offer us. Because we really can change the experience of driving a car through new technology. But how? I mean, AR, how can it help? Well, it can amplify driving sensations. We're just talking about safety, for instance. The fact of being able to see through physical obstacles, blind spots, for instance, blind angles. That's something that can make our cars much safer, for instance. Thomas, in your view, how will life on board cars change? I mean, if we're saying that cars will change their role, how will life on board change? Also, with the increasingly assisted driving modes that could even lead to autonomous driving without even a steering wheel, where the role of people within cars will change.
Some cars for Volkswagen, which is without a steering wheel, without any display, just working with AR and gestures and voice. I mean, I think the world this is what we love in our job, right? There's no limitation anymore. We can build, you could actually say for any brand, let's do the Ferrari vending machine. It's a very fast vending machine, goes to cool events where you have luxury food, luxury drinks, and it drives to the, but you can order it, you have a private party, you order the Ferrari vending machine, it drives by, opens up, and you have the best food, the best drinks, right? It could be that. It could be a gaming experience. You go into the car, everything becomes dark, and you're sitting there and you're playing a game which is used on mobility and whatever. So there's, for example, technologies out there which already get you all the information of the car, so that when you play in VR, you have the movement already in, so that you get not car sick, which is a big problem in this new self-driving thing. Or there is technologies where your seat, or we're working together with a company from Tel Aviv, where with actors, your seat is actually giving you the sensation of a V8 and stuff like that. It gives you actually feeling of things. So it could be a hairdresser salon, right? There's a big party in Torino, there's a big thing going on. It drives in front of the hotel, and the best hairdressers are in front of that. And Volkswagen has done the best hairdressing, whatever, automatic thing which comes to you. It can be everything. This is the cool thing about being in this new world. And one thing to designers and whatever, I think what you have here is, yes, Italy has a really good reputation of designers, and I think they should lead the future of the companies, because a designer in the perfect sense is creating experiences. It's not designing a hardware, it's not designing a software, it's not designing whatever. A designer designs the experience. And I think if we maybe change the leadership of these companies more to people who understand the complexity of experiences, I think that will be a very interesting move and very interesting change, because right now, when you look at these companies, they're driven by either financial backgrounds, management backgrounds, engineering backgrounds, but not one of the leaders of these companies has a design background. And look at the biggest companies out there who are really successful. They all have different backgrounds, right? They're not the financial guys, they're not whatever. So I think we should really think about this kind of change in leadership, and then all the other things will just fall into part. Because we're working really from cars which are purely kind of based on gaming, to cars who just not be cars anymore, just become as I said, a hairdressing salon, a vending machine, and whatever, to whatever extent, which I cannot name. But it's really interesting.
Okay, so you asked me to predict the future, and that's a dangerous business. If we think back over the last couple of years, for example, I don't think any of us, 2019, would have predicted COVID, war in Ukraine. The future is essentially unpredictable. But since you're putting us on the spot, so you know, I think there's going to be three things going to be really, really important. One is it is going to be a shared experience. It's not going to be the future of transportation is not going to be this thing that I own for the next 3 to 6 to 12 years. It is going to be a shared experience, and we're seeing that all across the globe today. Secondly, when I'm experiencing it, I want it to be the right experience for me. So your personal experience in that vehicle is going to be the most important thing to you. So if, for example, it is autonomous, then my ability to do other things to work, to socialize, to play games, is going to be central to my decision as to whether or not to use that vehicle or a different one. And so it's a complete change in prioritization. My experience in the car is going to be preeminent. But I think there's going to be a third aspect to it, which is once I don't have to commit to a car for a long period of time, once it is a shared experience, then I can be much less conservative than I have been in the past about my choices. I can explore, I can play, I can try out new ideas. And so it's going to be also an expression of fashion. And so I think that Italy is extremely well positioned for this new world. If I were to think of a business model that is kind of close to what I can imagine for the automobile of the future, it would be rent the runway. Do you know rent the runway?
No.
So it's, in the United States, many people they want to own high-end clothes. You know, the sort of thing they've seen on the red carpet going into the Oscars, but they can't afford them, and they feel silly making that investment for that short period of time. So there's a company that's set up called Rent the One Way, which enables you to rent designer clothing for a short period of time, to use it for that party, and then you return it and you rent something else. It's a fantastic business model. And again, I'm learning from my students, more and more students are interested in this notion of temporary ownership of luxury goods. And you can imagine where those brands come from, those designer brands that young people are aspiring to in Rent the Runway. They're Italian brands. And so I see there's an enormous opportunity for giving people the opportunity to explore fashion and brand through their automobile.
But in addition to that, coming back to the beginning, right? Also that the opportunity is also that companies, and Gucci is really showing right now, or Louis Vuitton is showing that, how much you can do in this virtual world, how you can sell your heritage into, if you translate it right, there's a whole new market waiting for you, where you can actually sell these products in a digital way, which opens up for you opportunities you never had before. And I think the same is true for all the other brands in Italy as well, because they're desirable. You just have to make them accessible in a way that people can actually really own them.
Yeah. Silvio, due domande. La prima è se come diceva...
Silvio, two questions. Would you be willing to hand your company over to designers? Watch out, because Tini Rice is here with us. And there's this second equation between the fashion world and the design world. Do you think there can be a link between them? Well, I'll start with the second question, otherwise I'll lose my job right away. Well, these worlds that become permeable are what we experience on a daily basis. These thoughts we have with the people I work with, both in the company and outside the company, they are issues we are discussing because the worlds are fluid today. The physical world is being mixed up with the digital world. And so to imagine the use of a vehicle, now let's simply talk about mobility, but we could extend this to other sectors, because as the Vice Minister was saying earlier, smart cities are an integral part of this whole process, this radical change that's underway. And therefore, worlds are no longer separated. There are no barriers anymore. Everything's fluid. What's real is virtual. What's virtual is real. And that's why we need to learn how to do things differently, or else release creativity more. And then at the end of the day, there's always an economic result in what we do. Companies, if they want to think into the future, they must in any event make profits that can be reinvested in a virtuous circle. And they do, they adapt, they find new paths to maximize this primary responsibility they have, which is clearly closely linked to social responsibility. And so we used to say that creativity should take power. Well, after all, yes, it's true, that's what's needed, but courage too. Why courage? Well, because it's too easy to say, well, it would have been easier to imagine this car model differently. Let's bear in mind that any decision about a new model, I'm thinking of the big brands, leads to investments that amount to a few billion. And so decisions are taken very, very cautiously because there's a lot at stake. And that's what we're lacking, I think. And we're pursued by the need to prove on a quarterly basis that we're distributing dividends, that we're increasing our profits, and perhaps this means we're less willing to accept risks to the point that risk is total and we've made mistaken decisions. These are classical examples. BlackBerry, for instance. I loved my BlackBerry. In 96, 97, when I had my first BlackBerry, I thought I had the world in my hands, and it no longer exists. What about Nokia? I mean, there are dozens of examples one can think of the inability, first of all, to understand that technological innovation as it was underway, and also little courage in willing to change.
Examples exactly of companies who focus on the product.
That's right.
And not on the experience. Right. When Steve Jobs came with the iPhone, it was all about experience. He didn't say this is the best phone. He said this is which combines everything, this experience, right? And all the examples you made is Nokia said, okay, nobody wants a touchscreen because they were so whatever, right? And look where they are. So I think we've seen now so many times that experience beats any product kind of focus. And still we have to explain it and explain it and explain it.
Allora, mancano 10 minuti alla fine della nostra diretta. Io coinvolgerei...
Okay, 10 minutes to the end of our session. I'm addressing to the Vice Minister once again. Smart cities, the new idea, the new concept of mobility cannot do without new infrastructures. What can you tell us about that? These investments should be private-public investments. Well, without infrastructures, our mobility opportunities cannot be enabled. Suffice to think of the electric columns, which of course require a radical change in the electric mains, in electricity distribution networks, or the 5G technology, which is partially available in the main cities, and that should be spread out, because otherwise you may have so many opportunities in terms of real-time features in my car, but I can't use them because I'm not supported by the technological infrastructure. Well, undoubtedly, this is the direction of the minister I represent, i.e. investing a lot, also relying on the funds provided by the EU, both for electric infrastructures and for road infrastructures. We're discussing, for example, how to make cities sensory worlds from the environmental viewpoint in terms of data collection. For example, we can change the software of a car going to a dealership. But in the near future, once you have proximity data centers, you can park your car, the car sharing parking lot, or at the office. The car will remain there connected, and the software is automatically uploaded. or cars can be turned into data collectors. For example, they might be used to collect distributed environmental data. Cars can collect data that can then be shared. And there are so many other things. It's important to know that all this is possible and that shared experience gives me the opportunity as a consumer, as a user, to have different cars according to what I decide to do. I may want to have a car for my weekend, or a different car for the city, or a third car for a different occasion. This is a big opportunity for the business. And we should make all this seamless. We should, of course, enhance infrastructures, standardize infrastructures, so that if I move from one place to the other, infrastructures will be the same, and that shouldn't negatively impact my experience. All right, we're moving towards the conclusions, so let me collect some of the questions coming from the streaming. Marco Della Monica is asking whether cars as the icon of your identity are disappearing. And it also says the brand should defend its own value system and heritage. I don't think that is disappearing. The success of Ferrari is a demonstration of that. Well, these are two different worlds that move in parallel, and I think they should be both nurtured. Laura Ferrero of Icona Design Group. Mobility is increasingly moving towards the creation of ecosystem. Designing a product is no longer enough. How is design interpreting this new trend? How is the paradigm shifting on the ecosystem? Harry Thomas.
I mean,
Well, I just want to respond to that first question, which I think was repeating something I had said, which is that the car as an icon of your adult identity is going away. And really what I should have said is ownership of the car as an icon of your adult identity is going away, because I think the use of it will continue. So just for clarification.
Okay.
And then the second question was about the growth of the... I'm going to hand over to you for that one.
Oh my God, I'm falling apart. So yeah, designing for the ecosystem means for us, our job is to make sure that when we create a new vehicle, that the influence of what we believe the user is looking for, the user experience itself, it's easy to access inside the car as well as going outside the car. For us, it really is about, okay, let's take any brand, let's take a Ferrari brand. An ecosystem for me, for a Ferrari brand, would be I have strong partnerships with a yacht club in Monaco, with whatever. So when I buy a certain Ferrari, it should come with this experience, which I maybe take away with my Ferrari key, maybe it's an interactive key, I don't want to have an app for everything, but it could be a very nice designed key with a digital display on it, and it shows me automatically access I have in the city I go, or it gives me access to a certain club, to a certain thing. So when we design for a new vehicle, it's really for us about, okay, understanding what are the users for this vehicle, and what could be the applications for this user when he is in the car, when he goes outside the car, and how much of an ecosystem we can create. And that really is something very interesting, because car manufacturers were not thinking about having a cloud system available, because that is really heavy tech. They were good for that, for the tech itself, but not for handling hundreds of brands. And I think what will be really interesting will be the standard in these clouds about how you can exchange data with other brands, and how can you implement that features with other brands. So, for example, one thing we did when we created Ford Pass, we started to build an ecosystem for them where we integrated worldwide with payment providers, so that every Ford can be a payment tool, so that we can actually go in garages and pay for parking places. This is an ecosystem we built worldwide for them, which allows now Ford users to have easy certain thing access. So for example, when you are with your kids on the way and you want to have a parking spot, you might know where the parking spot is actually safe at night, and not any parking spot. You want to have the parking spot which is safe, right? Things like that. So, and I think this is something which will become more and more important, the seamless integration of other brands and working with them together on a global scale.
Ok, l'ultima domanda viene da Giorgio Gamberini di Ital Design, che è qui in platea fra noi. La bellezza è
Beauty was the main topic of the pavilion at Dubai. Beauty and design have always been connected for Italy too. What are the guidelines of beauty in this context? Is there more room for beauty with the new technologies or not? We just have a few minutes left. I think we would need a lecture on this, a keynote lecture. Who wants to answer in just a few words? You. I think I shouldn't be talking about beauty. I'm not the one. Well, then you since you represent a company that is synonym for beauty. Well, beauty is always a priority for me in the world of cars. I can't imagine a car which is not a moving sculpture. Well, being part of Ferrari, that's probably natural to me. Contemplation of beauty is very important. It's part of the user experience. Just a few days ago, I had a beautiful experience with my son, who was with me when I tested Roma. Well, when he saw it, he was truly fascinated. But when I was driving, I was looking for his hand, and he said, no, don't touch me, Papa, because my hands are wet. Why? Are you worried I'm driving too fast? No, I know you drive in a very responsible way. I'm just, thrilled. Why? I'm deeply moved. I can't explain. There's so much beauty in this object that I feel so emotional. And he was like that for 30, 40 minutes. And then at a certain point, I told him, I learned so much from you. And I went back to the time or to the notion of beauty and how important beauty is. Because, and sometimes you forget about it, in your job. And it's so beautiful to see this depth of emotion in front of an object that must express beauty too, and not just a series of attributes which are connected to an industrial design product. So we have one more question. Enzo Carubba. How to combine the requirements of different geographical areas in design? Well, this is about culture again. Design is not a one-sided value. Harry, would you like to attempt an answer?
So, well, let me just add to Flavio's point that beauty is vital in everything, and we need more beauty in our lives. And what we have seen over, I think, the last century has been a kind of a convergence of views of beauty from across the world, in particular because I think of the power of Hollywood and media in the US and Europe. And perhaps what we're going to see in the next few years is more of a divergence, a flourishing of different expressions of beauty. And that's going to create new challenges for the automobile industry, but perhaps open up new possibilities for different brands to express themselves in different ways in different markets, and that will be a beautiful thing.
Allora, evidentemente le vostre risposte stanno sollecitando domande.
While your answers are prompting so many questions, how is user experience going to be combined with autonomous driving and safety on board? And what is the timeline in that respect? Well, as regards the timeline, the industry is setting some general timelines. However, for level 4 or level 5, it will take another 15 years. I will not give any answer about user experience in connected to autonomous driving. Thomas.
Well, that's very simple. It will be the 7th of August no. Autonomous driving and user experience is really what I said before. It's about the less you have to drive by yourself, the more it gives room to any other topic, right? And so in a sense, what it really drives through is when you look at the life cycle, or not the life cycle, the production cycle of a vehicle, where we write 5 years, whatever, this will shorten very much because you have to really adapt faster. So there will be separation of things where you actually really decide only where are the displays, where are the interactions, right? And now with the new technologies, I mean, there's now companies who make every window an interactive display and so on and so forth. So it gives us all the room and space to create whatever we want within this car. So I think the user experience, the more we autonomous drive, the more different kind of user experiences we can provide. So the limitation is really just about, okay, how far can we go? Because the technology is ready for it, and I think also the industry is ready for it. So we just have to wait until certain technologies are adapted, and I guess it's another 1 to 2 years until you see certain technologies more advanced. And so step by step, we will increase that. That's for sure. So there's a correlation between how much can the car drive by itself and how much can I create as user experience in the car.
Allora io finirei con una domanda a questo punto al Vice Ministro Todde, visto che siamo...
A question for the Vice Minister. One last question. Well, since here we are in Turin, the capital of cars, electric cars impact on the endothermal supply chain. What are you planning to support the Italian industrial fabric? Well, support is associated to two main aspects. On the one hand, we want to support companies who decide to change their business model to make sure that they can transform and can develop different models. At the same time, we're also making sure that also the adoption of new possibilities, new technologies are made available, and then really aim at upskilling for people who may come from worlds that may no longer be requested in the future, skills that are no longer needed, and turn that into something that can truly be useful. Well, this is a tough challenge because it presupposes that companies want to change, which is not to be taken for granted. One issue is resistance to change, of course. Companies who see the world changing around them, but they're not ready to leave behind gratifying things or profitable things in the past. And our industrial fabric in Italy is made of small and medium-sized companies, which is based on individual rather than extended change. We should think of what are the opportunities offered by the new mobility paradigm and understand how to move towards it as soon as possible. Leveraging transition as a moment to change and not to deny that the transition will take place, because transition is taking place. How to achieve it, how to make it efficient, well, it's up to us. What we are doing is supporting companies through dedicated measures and work a lot at skilling and upskilling. And also education, for example, technical secondary schools or university technical, let's say, colleges are actually applying that, and also investments. Thank you very much. We'd like to thank Thomas Felger, Manzoni, and Harry West on this floor. At this point, the floor to Mr. Angori for the conclusions. So, well, 2 hours and 15 minutes. It was really fast.
Fine, thank you. I'd like to join in thanking the Vice Minister, Tommy Harry, and you, Flavio, too, for having moderated this chat. Were I to recap it all, could I say that I've met my goal, the goal that we'd set ourselves with the steering committee of the group? I'd say yes. What we wanted to do with this meeting was to bear witness to the deep paradigm shift that's taking place in the automotive world, that designers and engineers are an integral part of, and also try and understand how we can become drivers of this change. We believe that it's from this ability of ours to imagine the future that the future of our companies depends, and we especially wanted to inform everyone that this radical change that's occurring is something we feel very affected by. Our organization is a small organization, but it has as members a number of companies that are part of automotive history, and they want to be part of the next chapter of automotive future. And we hope that this can become a common house, this organization of ours, where others can continue in this dialogue. So imagine the future from the standpoint of designers, of people who must contribute to creating a better world. So thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to those who have been listening for these 2 hours. And I hope to see you all again next year to continue our work on these topics. Thank you.